Hello, sisters, siblings, brothers of the Central Pacific Conference. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Reverend Tyler Connoley. I'm your conference minister, and I am so glad that we're able to be here in this moment together, in this space, in this service. Also, I know that there are many of you who are watching this who are not part of the Central Pacific Conference, and I'm glad that you're here too. And I'm grateful that we get to be here on Easter Sunday together in this way, or maybe after Easter Sunday, whenever it is that you're watching this. I believe that Christ is present wherever people are gathered in his name. And across space and time, he is present with us in this moment, here where I'm recording, and you where you are sitting, and all of us together in this mystery that is the church. Before I start my sermon, I also want to say thank you to in particular to Laura Lee Kent and Adam Hange, who had the idea of having this service and who got it going, and to all of the people who made this service possible. I think it's so amazing that we got this done so quickly and that we got people who are from Oregon and Washington and Idaho to participate, and just to be able to be present in this way, in this moment, is really amazing to me. I'm so excited that this was able to come together in this way. I also am often asked to greet people on behalf of the Central Pacific Conference. As the conference minister, the Central Pacific Conference is the churches of the United Church of Christ in Oregon and Southern Idaho, and 2 churches in Washington. And so there are many settings in which I'm asked to greet people. For example, the Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon Common Table, we put out a joint op-ed that will hopefully be running soon. And for that thing, I greeted on behalf of the Central Pacific Conference, on behalf of the churches of the Central Pacific Conference. But in these kinds of settings, I like to bring greetings to the conference, and because if you are a member of one of those 43 churches in Oregon or Washington or Idaho, or you are a belonger to one of those churches or in some way connected, then you are part of us. Then you are the Central Pacific Conference. And so today, in this moment, I bring you greetings, Central Pacific Conference, in the name of the Christ who is risen. And now, before I preach, let us pray. Spirit of love and wisdom, thank you, because you are always present to us. You are always present with us. Whenever we call on you, you are closer than our breath. Today I ask you to be with us. Guide the things that I say. Help me to say what you would have me to say. As we listen, help us to hear what we need to hear today, even if what we hear is not exactly what I say, because we know you have that power. We ask this all in your holy name. Amen. So, when I was asked to preach for this service, when this service was beginning to come together, and I realized that I was going to be the one to preach it, I have to say that some words went through my head that preachers aren't supposed to say. And because one of the things that I love about conference ministry is that I get to experience Easter and Christmas the way most of you experience Easter and Christmas. In the pews, participating, listening to someone bring new meaning to these old texts. And I was never a preacher who particularly liked preaching Easter and Christmas. And then in this moment, I'm really have struggled with, what do I say? What is there about Easter that I can say in this moment? My dad's a preacher, and I was talking to him about it, and I said, I feel like I'm being asked to preach an Easter sermon from the Holy Saturday grave. You see, like you, I have been stuck in my house. I've been alone in my apartment for many, many days. And I feel sometimes like I am entombed here. Like it is the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter. And it's not yet Easter. And yet, this is the sermon that I need to preach, a sermon about Easter and about the risen Christ and about the story of the Christ who rose from the dead. And so, from this Holy Saturday place, I began to think about those women who came to the tomb that morning. I know that we are all over the place theologically in the United Church of Christ, and I don't know what you think about the nature of the resurrection or what you have experienced of the story of the resurrection. And maybe you're like me, you've watched too many Easter pageants and Easter movies in which you see the light and the flashing. And I want you to, for this moment, forget all of the things that you've wondered about and thought about and just enter into this story with me. You see, in the story as it's presented to us in the Gospels, the resurrection happens off screen. It's something that we don't get to see. It's something that we know happened, but we're not there for it. And so in this story today, we arrive just before sunrise with the women who are coming to the tomb. They have no idea the Christ is risen. They are in that Saturday. They're grieving. They're feeling alone and they're feeling bereft. And they come to the tomb and they find that he is not there. And they don't know. They don't know that he has risen. All they know is that he's not there. And so they run to get some other people and some of the male disciples who slept in that morning. And they tell them the story that they went to the tomb and he wasn't there. And those disciples come and look in the tomb and find that he's not there. And then there are these two angels who appear and say he's risen. And that is the first moment when Christ is actually risen for them. And I think for some of them, maybe even not yet. I've been thinking about this in terms of coming out. I had a friend who came out to me as male, and he said to me, "I've always been a boy. You just didn't know it." And I think in this moment, see, Christ has been risen. He is risen. They just don't know it. That feels a lot like right now. I've also been thinking about how Christ rises over and over and over again. The same way that those of us who are LGBT come out over and over again, coming out of the tomb, coming out of the closet. You see, each person has to have their experience. So Mary has the experience of not knowing that Christ is risen and meeting this man who she thinks is the gardener. And then he arises. Suddenly, he is alive. She didn't know it. She was talking to him even. But he's alive. He's always been alive. He's been alive. But he's alive now for her. In another gospel, we have the story of the road to Emmaus and these people who many weeks after the resurrection don't know that Jesus is alive. Don't know that he's been risen. And those people discover him risen in the breaking of the bread. When they invite a stranger in to eat, and then he blesses the bread and breaks it. And they know suddenly that he's alive. By the way, this is just an aside. I don't think that we always have to tell the same story when we do communion. Just because Paul said, "I pass on to you what I received, that on the night when Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and broke it." There were lots of stories of Jesus and his breaking of bread and his eating that the early disciples told. We have evidence that some of the early churches used the story of Jesus eating fish with the disciples after his resurrection, that was the story they told in that moment. And one of the stories that I love to tell and that I invite you to tell in this resurrection moment, in this resurrection season of Easter, is the story of the road to Emmaus. That in the breaking of the bread, they discovered that he was risen. What a beautiful story of the table to tell right now. And so I've been thinking about the ways that Christ's rising was both already happened and not yet. And I think that that is a moment that we are in right now. For many of us, we are still in, for me, I will say, I am still in the Holy Saturday moment. I am not feeling Easter right now. I know he is risen. And I know that I will experience it again. It is both already happened and not yet. Just like it was for Mary. Just like it was for the apostles on the road to Emmaus. Just like it was for Thomas, who heard the stories but couldn't believe it until he saw it for himself. This idea of coming and time and not yet and now also makes me think of the promise of Jeremiah. You see, Jeremiah was preaching to people very much like us in a moment of exile, in a moment when they were feeling lost and maybe abandoned. And in that moment, he gave them this beautiful prophecy. And one of the things that I love about Hebrew that doesn't show up often in translations is that in Hebrew there's actually only two tenses. There are some other tenses that are used in some sort of obscure places, but mostly there's only things that have happened, things that are complete, and things that are not complete. There's no real future tense. And when we translate into English, or Spanish or any other language, we often clean up the tenses and we use our more expanded ability to talk about future and future perfect and past imperfect and all the different kinds of tenses that are available to us. But I want you to hear this text in a way that I think is a little more like the way the people who first heard it might have heard it. Our God proclaims, "The people who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness. As Israel searched for a place of rest, our God appeared to them from a distance. I have loved you with a love that lasts forever. And so, with unfailing love, I draw you to myself. Again, I build you up. Again, I rebuild virgin Israel. Again, you play your tambourines and dance with joy. Again, you plant vineyards on the fields, on the hills of Samaria. Farmers plant and then enjoy the harvests." I love the way that future vision of a time when we will someday plant again, someday work again, becomes present tense. Again you plant, again you sing, again you play this tambourine. It is both future and it is also present in our hope. And that finally brings me to this poem that was offered to us by the folks at Bridgeport. This is a poem that has meant a lot to them at Easter time in the past. And I love the way that this poem is both, for me anyway, a poem about Thursday, when Jesus was not certain that he wanted to go through with it, and a poem about the resurrection. It starts with this sadness. It is time to go. I can smell it, breathe it, touch it, and something in me trembles. I will not cry. And it ends with time to go from all I am to all I have not yet become. What beautiful words for now. You see, the thing that we are becoming, that we are not yet, is a thing that we can't really know yet. but is a thing that is calling us into a future in which we experience again that Christ is risen. My mom, when I was talking to her about this sermon, she said, make sure that you end with, he is risen indeed. And I have to say, I was like, Mom, I don't know if I can say that right now. But as I thought about it, I realized that that ancient greeting of the Christians has always been used in the way that we're using it right now. See, in ancient times, Christians would often greet one another by saying, Christ is risen. And the response was, he is risen indeed. Or, Christ is alive. And the response is, yes, he is alive. And I think that there were lots of moments in Christian history when people needed to be reminded of that. Jesus needed to come out again and again and again and again. Because there are always moments when we forget. There are always people who don't yet know. And so even when it doesn't feel real, we say, Christ has risen. He is risen indeed.